So hi everyone and welcome to Architecture in the Den. My name's Lisa Raynes. I'm the founder of Pride Road, the architectural practice franchise. I'm a chartered architect with about 23 years experience. Oh, and I'm just standing for RIBA National Council. So, so vote for me if you're listening to this before the 30th of July and you've not already cast your vote. So today I'm delighted to welcome Louise Priestman. So Louise is an architect working at Arup, and we're going to be talking about conservation. So hi Louise.
Hi Lisa. Firstly, I've not cast my vote yet, so excellent. Yeah, so hi. I guess I could just do a quick background on me. Yeah, I actually came into architecture slightly odd way. Didn't have a kind of long-standing dream to ever be one or anything like that. I basically did what many of us do pre-COVID, go traveling, and came back and fell into what was an office junior role at an architect's firm in New York. And the idea was I was going to do an apprenticeship in basically office management and just do the office side. And I was at the first firm called Purcell. It's a conservation architecture practice, pretty well known. There's offices throughout the UK and abroad. And yeah, basically there's only so many cups of tea and filing that you can do before you think, it looks quite interesting what you're all up to. And I was really fascinated with the work that everyone was doing and the kind of the skills, the technical ability, understanding that even in old buildings, there's a lot of thought process and design elements involved, as well as just really understanding how a building behaves.
So how old were you at that point?
I was 18, so I was there till I was 20.
So you just come out of school with A levels?
Well, I mean, I won't bore you, but basically I didn't even have A levels.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I had to do things a bit backwards. So after deciding to take the route of becoming an architect, I needed to get my A levels.
Oh, okay. So how did you do that?
So I basically got a part-time job selling baby clothes in a shop in York, and in between that studied privately for my A levels and just booked the exams at a local school. Gave myself about, it must have been about 4 or 5 months. Sorry, clock will remind me of things.
Very good.
Still haven't quite worked out how to send the thing off.
So that's amazing. And what A levels were they?
Not related really to architecture at all. So there was, I did have a AS level in art already, but then I did business studies and religious studies, of which I chose Buddhism because I've been a practicing Buddhist, so it was just a bit easier, to be honest. So in my head, I just picked ones that I knew I could get reasonable grades in quite a short space of time.
Right.
And anyway, I got the grades I needed alongside my work experience. Having been in a firm for like 18 months, I was basically told that I was in. So that was kind of the start of it, really. And I think
that's amazing, because I know, if people listen to the podcast who may be thinking about a route into architecture and not necessarily the conventional way, and I know, around COVID at the moment, it's really hampered those traditional routes into education. I know, certainly with me and sort of my kids, I think GCSE specifically have been kind of completely hampered by COVID.
Yeah.
And kind of the normal traditional routes into A levels and university are just going to change.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's been particularly difficult. Mine was sort of self-inflicted, whereas I think, for the current generation, it's been forced upon them. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly an example of you don't have to go the usual route. And actually, I think now there's the benefit of apprenticeship schemes as well in architecture, which, you know, if that had have existed at the time, it's probably something I would have done.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are other routes, and also it just shows how valuable work experience is. And I'm a real advocate for any student from, you know, 14 onwards, really, who just to try and find experience at a practice to give them an idea of what it's really like, because I think the perception of what architects are and do can be quite different to what actually goes on behind the scenes.
So you applied for university?
Yeah, so I applied for university and was accepted, and did my part 1 at Lincoln University.
Okay.
And again, I had a look at, you know, whether I should take an extra year, get even better A levels, and go to, you know, better universities. But actually, I found, having visited quite a few, that the newer universities were investing far more into their buildings, equipment, you know, printing facilities, workshops. I was really impressed by the kind of newness and investment, which I didn't see at the kind of well-established university. So that's why I chose Lincoln, and it was cheap rent, which as a poor student, that was also very welcome. So yeah, I did my part 1 there, and did a lot of, mostly from my experience at university, there's a lot of kind of new build stuff and clear sites, and actually, you know, most projects there's something knocking around that's going to cause problems. And so yeah, in my part 1, in my final year, we got to choose our project, and I actually chose, and it's worth a visit if you're in the Midlands, there's a place called Sutton Scarsdale, which is a ruined 18th century building opposite the motorway of Hardwick Hall and Bolsover Castle. And yeah, I created a scheme within the ruins, because I just really liked to learn about the history of a place and what happened to it. Why did it become ruins? And actually, my highest grade came from research of this building, because there's a lot to learn. And then yeah, I was planning to actually do, after this, I got accepted to the University of Bath's conservation course. But through my research in my part 1, I'd got talking to a few people at the Prince's Foundation. And anyway, they were doing a fellowship program, which kind of on a whim I applied for, got an interview, and then got accepted. And it was a fully paid for scholarship in sustainable urbanism. And there's a real hybrid of heritage and you know, master planning, which was great. Yeah, and then I moved on to part 2 after doing that, and some work experience for a couple of years, and then did deliberately choose a university which was pro heritage and designing around heritage, which was the University of West England. And then once I'd finished my part 2, I knew I wanted to do conservation architecture, but I also wanted to be able to kind of design within a heritage setting. And I think it's very easy to feel like in conservation you just do old stuff and repair buildings, which you do, and there's a lot of specification for it. But actually, being able to design around something that already exists and something that really complements it and stands the test of time, I find quite challenging, which is why I quite enjoy it, I think. And there's also a lot of problem solving. So if you're a problem solver, or you like any kind of issue which is totally unknown territory that you have to figure out, conservation is really good, because every problem will be different. And I think, you know, looking at my time so far, from when I have been working, that there are just some buildings which can bring you a lot. And one of my favourite projects was working at on the Elizabeth Tower, Big Ben. And you know, really the job was quite simple. It was just looking at the stonework, checking what needed replacing, repointing, and all that. But to be able to stood up there at the clock tower, being part of a team which was responsible for maintaining this absolutely incredible asset of our country.
Yeah.
I won't ever forget. So even if the job itself is quite boring,
Yeah.
the process and the location can be amazing.
When did you do that?
That was a couple of years ago.
And was that with Arups?
No, so that was with Purcell.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, sorry, I've missed a step there. So once I finished my part two, I was working at a small firm, doing like small scale conservation and new builds of kind of nice wealthy people's houses on the outskirts of London. They're all very lovely, and yeah, really wanted to kind of get into the meat of the challenge of conservation. So I ended up moving to Purcell in Canterbury. And yeah, that's where I was working on Big Ben, and also things like Canterbury Cathedral has just been completely re-roofed over the whole nave. Some really amazing structural and technical things going on there. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about having the privilege of standing like on the tower of a cathedral and knowing that what you're specifying will be there way longer than I'll be around. So yes, I guess I'm just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what couple of projects and what they involve maybe.
Yeah,
and,
that would be amazing. So you moved from Purcell, and then you're at Arups at the moment?
Yes, so we my family decided to move back up north. I'm a Yorkshire girl, and very keen to introduce the Yorkshire accent to my daughter as early as possible. And then there's a conservation architect position that came up with Arup in the York office, and it just fit really nicely with the move. And seeing a different perspective. Arup is primarily engineers. I don't have an engineer's mind, so it's been really good opportunity to kind of broaden my horizon of understanding a specialism who we work with on almost a daily basis. So to kind of build that knowledge with each other and share and just understand each other a bit better, I think has been really helpful, because there's a lot to engineering which you appoint a structural engineer on a project and they give you the calculations and tell you the problems and then you fix it. So to understand the process behind what they're doing and saying and specifying has been really helpful. So
amazing.
Currently at Arup.
Amazing. So you were going to tell us about a couple of projects that you've worked on?
Yeah, I will do. So I guess I'll start with the small scale stuff. So one example was this was when I was working at the residential firm, who were, some of the most talented people that I've ever come across in terms of design. They're really fantastic. And we did a lot of new builds, particularly in kind of traditional styles, although there was some contemporary work as well. But one project I had was, I can't remember how many greats, but it was Jane Austen's great something grandfather's house. And it's sort of 15th century Wealdon Hall, which is a timber frame building with kind of render and brickwork. It was a real patchwork piece of design. Anyway, it was this beautiful old building, really ancient, and it sat within a courtyard, and then there was a barn conversion at the other side and stable conversion. So it's like just a proper square courtyard, and Jane Austen's great grandfather's house was on the left. And they really wanted to create a kind of modern contemporary kind of kitchen diner extension. It's what many people are looking for now, but obviously
just bear with me one second.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Live interruptions.
They're all, I know about that. My clock will be going again in a minute. So so they had, before I returned back to this firm for my part 3, they'd had, I think, 3 goes at trying to get consent to do an extension.
Yeah.
And because they couldn't reconfigure the interior because it was grade 2 star listed, so there was a lot of you can't touch really anything in there, it's so ancient. And the idea was to create an extension within this courtyard. Now, sticking a building in a historic courtyard is something that you wouldn't really usually do. But they had this house had been separated into 2 dwellings, and so one of them had built like a really large hedge around the side of their boundary, so it kind of cut into the courtyard area.
Yeah.
So the idea was to create something very traditional, very, you know, sensitive and appropriate timber frame structure, and it got thrown out because there was no justification really for putting a structure within a courtyard, irrespective of this massive hedge. And as someone who's really interested in history and trying to really understand a building and a place, I did a lot of analysis in understanding the kind of value of that building, what was really important about it. And Historic England have what's called conservation principles and heritage values. Yes. And these values help you define what is really important about that building. So some buildings, like this one, for me, you know, the actual structure had been messed around with quite a lot. It'd been cut up in half. The courtyard had a big hedge in it. Then the buildings, you know, were now houses, all separate, not all part of the same estate anymore. And to me, the value, although there was a lot of historic fabric, was the narrative of the building. So this link back to, you know, Jane Austen's descendant, really important. And actually, when we started looking at certain details of the building, there were still elements with like his initials on, which had been saved on another part of the building. And I also looked at the like historic maps, and what I discovered very interestingly was on this site of this pit where we wanted to put an extension, there was historically a structure there. And you will for the students out there, you will find that when you're doing work, precedents are really important. And if there was something there, it makes it a lot easier to justify putting something back. And so we designed a you know, really contemporary structure, single story with a like a curved wall, so you demolish and get rid of the hedge and put in what just looked like a just a garden wall, really, with like a hidden door into one side, and then there'll be glass on the other side so they could still enjoy the privacy of their garden. And I worked through the heritage values and justifying it as to why we could do it. And the conservation officer in his report said, I don't really want to approve this, but I can't not approve it because the justification is so robust. And we've had the design panel look at it and they're really happy with it as well. So I kind of reluctantly recommend approval. So, you know, there we go. It's going to really chime as well because it's hitting midday. So we're just going to have to apologise and let it do what it's doing.
It must be like looking at the Queen Elizabeth Tower and
yeah. Thankfully they turned that off when we were up there. Otherwise, I think it was a seriously good issue.
I mean, it reminds me of when I was working in practice. You know, I could sort of also, I wasn't necessarily a conservation architect, but worked on listed buildings and buildings in conservation areas. And sort of running up against the conservation officers over various things. And I remember particularly, so there was a bill kind of, you know, I think when I'd just qualified, so like 20 odd years ago, there was a building that did have kind of like historic value that the kind of our clients were just looking to demolish and sort of put some kind of like a commercial building in its place that was going to, you know, have a clear ground floor structure. It was right in the middle of Manchester, so, you know, it had a specific kind of economic value in terms of having a floor space. And I was kind of involved in those conservation arguments over whether, you know, to keep it, to not keep it. It wasn't listed. You know, sort of we looked at sort of ways of restoring it. It had terracotta faience that had sort of like an ironwork skeleton to it that had completely perished. So it was, the whole thing was crumbling.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely heartbreaking to, you know, to kind of look at, you know, trying to kind of work out whether it was economically viable to keep it.
Yeah.
And kind of like the practice I was at the time, you know, we were commercial practice, and so I had to look at all this historical information and go, and I've got to make a case for the demolition. And I was really conflicted.
It's a real difficult one, that.
It was a real difficult one. I mean, so fast forward kind of 20 odd years. In fact, I think I ended up being made redundant from that practice whilst on maternity leave.
Oh dear.
You kind of wonder where certain values lie.
Yeah, you do, certainly. Goodness me.
And kind of working in private practice, you know, kind of setting up Pride Road. You know, we work for domestic clients, and we work for clients where, you know, what we're doing, how we're helping them is really valuable.
Yeah.
You know, it's you know, we are working with existing buildings, you know, sort of you know, there's a lot of Victorian kind of terraces and sort of 1930s houses. You know, it is our historic fabric. So, you know, you do come across all those conservation issues, but also, you know, actually what we're doing has got economic, social value, and not just kind of justifying a case for demolition of a of a building, you know, whether it's historic or not historic. You know, for the sake of making, you know, a financial reward to, you know, a pension company. So, you know, there's the historic values and there's the social values as well. So
yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's a real balance to what is the right approach, and obviously if you're appointed by a client to do something, there's that balance of your beliefs versus what they want. And I think part of the fun of it's not about being conservation architect, just an architect, is kind of understanding your values against the values of the building and the client, and then like you say, you're really trying to kind of sell to them the right approach based on your professional opinion. And I mean, it's looking at kind of the polar opposite scale. So at the moment at Arup, I'm working on it's the sort of polar opposite scales, really. So the two kind of key ones are, one is a railway station which is being upgraded, and it's grade 1 listed, and you know, there's always the perception engineering comes first, and it does in many ways, but there's certain parts of these massive structures you really want to retain. But it's trying to understand the benefit versus harm as well. So yes, some things might need to be removed, but the benefits are, you know, I think the communal value of an improved railway station, particularly as we move forward into kind of more environmentally friendly society, is really important. And I think that, you know, on a small scale, we've just got a project on site at the moment for so a slight anomaly with churches and cathedrals, that an architect is appointed for that structure. So for example, I have a handful of churches and I'm the architect, I'm responsible. So whatever happens with the firm, should I be made redundant or whatever, I take the church. And it's the same with cathedrals. So you are appointed. Yeah. So if you're looking for a bit of stability, church work is actually really great, because, you know, as long as you do a good job, you've got them for life. Yeah. And
so you have like a number of churches that you keep in your pocket, kind of thing.
There's a little pocket there, and yeah, I just, for me, I guess it depends on your personality. I'm a real people person, and I love being able to help clients and for them to feel supported. And in churches, you often have really passionate people looking after some of our most important heritage assets without the technical knowledge of how to really look after these buildings. So to be able to be that kind of link between the two to kind of maintain this, you know, community asset. And I think, you know, a lot of churches are now seeing these structures as not only a place of religious worship, but also a place for communities to congregate for different events of all kinds of things. And you know, they're big enough and robust enough to be able to take it.
Amazing.
Yeah, so we've got one of those.
Yeah. So looking at the time, it's flown already.
Right.
And I think we can draw the conversation to a close.
Yeah, crikey, yeah. Well, I guess I just have sort of one more thing to say really then. So anyone who is interested in conservation or learning more about it, you know, anyone can become accredited in conservation once you're an architect. And actually even people who go into being planning officers, conservation officers, etc., there are bodies you can go to. So the three that I wanted to mention is the IHBC, which is for any conservation professional, really active membership there, and do a lot of CPDs, etc.
What does it stand for, IHBC?
Institute of Historic Building Conservation. And then you've got the AABC, which is the Accredited Architects in Building Conservation. And they're the ones that do an apprenticeship scheme, which I actually started after I finished my part 2 and was in my part 3. So they assign you a mentor who's accredited. You prepare 5 case studies, and they kind of help you make sure that they're kind of, you're on the right track, and if you need certain bits of experience, how to do that. And that was really beneficial for me, and I would highly recommend it for anyone who's kind of fresh out and interested. And also it's really good because when you've done your part 3, you're used to kind of working and studying, and it's quite a lot of labor of love to pull these case studies together. So if you can keep the momentum going, it is a lot easier and less painful from people I've spoken to who are now or have been through the accreditation process later on. And then the final one is RIBA. So RIBA now have their own conservation courses and accreditation as well. And there's 3 levels: conservation registrant, someone who's kind of interested as a beginner, conservation architect, and then a specialist conservation architect as well. So they're the 3 to me which are worth looking at. You might not want to do all 3, but 1 or 2 of them would be really useful. And yeah, you've got my name now, so if anyone wants to contact me and pick my brains, then I'd be happy to help talk you into it. I'll talk about it, I'm not sure.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Louise Priestman, that is, for coming on the podcast. So if you've enjoyed listening to the podcast, you can find us on YouTube. Please subscribe, like and share, and you can do the same on Spotify, on all usual channels. If you want to get in touch, as Louise said, we'll put Louise's details in the bio blog below. If you want to come and join us as a guest, please get in touch with me, Lisa Raynes, and we'd love to have you on. So thanks for joining us, Louise, and good luck with everything.